Would you admit to a brutal murder that you didn't commit? Do you think, given the right circumstances, you would crack and say that you did it? I'm sure most people would probably say no, but the reality is false confessions are much more common than you might think. The work of organisations like the Innocence Project have uncovered hundreds of false confessions, and not just a simple yes it was me either, confessions with a detailed description in some cases. But how does this happen? How does someone say that they did something as horrible as murder, like if they didn't? It would never happen to me though, right? Well, it's complicated, and in today's video I would like to try and explain how this can in fact happen to you and how the justice system not only allows it but encourages it with the psychological interrogation techniques they teach and use. We will get into all of this today and take a look at a recent case with a boatload of controversy attached to it as a little case study. So, part 1, police.
Getting a little overwhelmed, please step out of the courtroom, compose yourself, and then come back inside.
So, anyone can be broken down to a point where confessing seems like the best and maybe the only option. We're only human and we all have our breaking point. But there are a few myths about false confessions, and that being one of them, that we'd need to know about first. I'm going to be using a really informative presentation from the Northwestern Pritzker School of Law by Northwestern law professors Stephen Dreisen and Laura Nyrider. They discuss powerful psychological techniques used in police interrogations that can lead people to falsely confess. Parts of this presentation were used in the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer that gained huge success and garnered the case we will be talking about today almost global recognition. I would implore you to watch the whole 2 hours of the presentation, but I'll be using the main point here and including clips where relevant. Like now, I will let Laura Nyrider explain what she says are the common myths.
But there's a couple of myths out there about false confessions that I want to dispel right away. The first one is that it's obvious when a confession is false, right? We all think, well, I'd be able to tell a false confession when I heard one because, of course, the person wouldn't be able to describe the crime. The person wouldn't sound like he or she knew what they were talking about. But that's not true. Again, these confessions are detailed. They sound accurate. They sound believable. Another myth, I would only falsely confess if somebody beat me, right? Also not true. In these cases, there's not a single case amongst them of physical abuse. Rather, all of these false confessions that I'm talking about were obtained through the use of psychological interrogation techniques. Nobody laid a finger on these people. And we're going to talk about how that happens. Another one, only juveniles or persons with mental limitations would falsely confess. Well, that's not true too. It's true that they're more vulnerable to those techniques in the interrogation room. But each and every one of us has our breaking point. And the question is, when do those psychological tactics in the interrogation room cross that breaking point? And in fact, we know that false confessions are so powerful, that believe it or not, 81% of people who falsely confess to crimes, who took their cases to trial, who fought their cases, who stood up for their innocence, were convicted nonetheless. This is a real problem.
So now that we've established it can happen to anyone, the next question would be, well, how did the wrong person get in the interview room in the first place? It's a good question. There is said to be 3 errors to a false confession, and we will go through all of these and see some examples of the errors in action. The first error explains how anyone can end up on the wrong end of the law. The first error is the misclassification error. This is a complicated one we will come back to in just a moment, as we will need a bit more context. But the second error is the coercion error. This answers how they are convinced to say something so wild and how they get you in the same room as the victim, for lack of a better phrase, even if you haven't been. They use subtle language to corner you and trip you up, a tactic we see often but it's crucial to a false confession. But how do they know what to say? Because of course saying something wild is not the same as saying something only the killer would know. This is where the contamination error comes in, and this is very closely tied to the second error, and we'll revisit all of these and see some examples play out in an interrogation. So to understand how the wrong person can get into the interview room, it's helpful to understand how a police investigation works in order to fully appreciate the first error, misclassification. The first stage of a police interrogation would be the interview, and it's exactly what it sounds like. These are just open-ended questions, and it seems like a normal chat for the most part. Things like, why would someone do this? How do you know the person? Where was you at the time of the murder? And things like that.
They went to a birthday party yesterday over at a friend's house down the street.
And then, is someone sleeping in the basement?
I did a few times the separation thing. I just struck.
How recently?
Probably about 2 nights ago, 3 nights. Well, when she was here, so probably last time was Thursday night, Friday.
Okay. And what was the conversation this morning?
This is to gauge your reaction and will be used to push to the next stage of the interview. This initial interaction can happen for a number of reasons. Think walking through a bad area at night, you could be questioned and misclassified. You could possibly be of a certain class or a certain race, and this will create a misclassification. Because whenever the police talk to you in regards to a crime, it's not about finding the innocent people for the most part. They're analysing every word and action and making a judgment on whether you're being truthful or not. We will come back to all this in a moment. The second stage of a police interview would be the interrogation stage. This is also what you would think. Very confrontational and accusatory, and it's more about getting that statement that can put you away for a long time and close the case. This is where they would normally take you to the station, whereas the first stage can kind of happen anywhere really. But it's the first stage where the misclassification will happen, but how exactly? Well, what's really happening is the police are using behavioural analysis techniques taught to them by their department to determine whether you've been truthful. It's information seeking. They think any trained cop can see when somebody is lying because there are signs that a trained eye can spot. The police are trained to spot liars and they are supposed to be really good at it. So the important question is, how are they trained? And this is where we start to see a problem. Police in the USA, by and large, use the Reid technique. 2 out of 3 police officers are trained in this way for interrogations, boasting an 85% success rate once somebody is fully trained. Developed about 50 to 60 years ago by John E. Reid, it's best described as behavioural analysis and it's the leading method in the States. They are trained to watch how you answer those information-seeking questions and are constantly judging you on your answers. They're reading your body language, looking for any verbal breaks, and even the way that you sit, deciding whether or not the way that you answered something is truthful or not, based on what is taught by the Reid technique. So let's take a closer look at what they say indicates deception.
Because police are actually trained that deception can be detected by the way in which you answer questions, and that all it takes is proper training for a police officer to turn into a human lie detector. So let's take a look at some of these training materials that teach this behavioral analysis. This is a handout that is used by a company called John E. Reid and Associates. They're based here out of Chicago, and about 50 or 60 years ago they developed a psychological interrogation technique that has since become the most widely used interrogation technique in the country. About 2/3 of all officers around the country are trained how to interrogate in the Reid technique. So let's take a look at this handout, because this is a handout that Reid uses to train officers about behavioral analysis. You can see here on the left-hand side, we have deceptive denials. These are phrases that people who are supposed to be lying use. Then here on the right-hand side, truthful denials. These are supposed to be indicators of innocence, of telling the truth. So let's take a look. I didn't take that money. That means you're lying. I didn't do that to her. That means you're lying. Look on the other side. I did not rob anyone. Well, that means you're telling the truth. I did not rape her. That means you're telling the truth. All right, let's keep going. These are some slides used by the president of John E. Reed and Associates during a presentation that he gave at the University of Arkansas about his interrogation techniques. And again, on the left hand, we have body language cues that are supposed to be used by somebody telling the truth. Right-hand side is cues that are supposed to be indicators of lying. So let's take a look. Truthful individuals: composed, concerned, cooperative, direct, sincere, and open. Kind of sounds like a Boy Scout. A truthful individual has open palms, maintains frontal alignment, don't turn that body, frontal alignment, and a truthful person makes smooth posture changes. Let's look over here, though, for lying. What means you're lying? Slouching means you're lying. Lacking frontal alignment means you're lying. Hand over mouth or eyes means you're lying. How about this? Can you read that? I don't know means you're lying. I can't recall means you're lying. Referring to God or religion, my God, I would have never committed this crime. That means you're lying. Now, if this sounds crazy to you, I think you're right. Reed and Associates claims an 85% accuracy rates in these methods of detecting deception. But virtually every independent study that's taken a look and evaluated these techniques has found that people are not human lie detectors, even officers who have been trained in this technique. Even officers who've been trained fare no better than chance when they're trying to determine whether somebody is telling the truth or lying. They're right about 45 to 60% of the time. It's basically a coin toss. The truth is, there's no human behavior that is unique to deception. There's no physiological giveaway that will tell you when someone is telling the truth or lying. But this is a powerful, powerful myth amongst law enforcement because it leads to this misclassification error, making wrong assumptions about whether somebody is lying and therefore guilty based on body language and choice of words and whether they say, I don't know. This is a powerful error. It can lead to bias in the investigation, and it can trigger interrogation.
As you can see, it's very arbitrary and sometimes actually quite silly. It's incredibly difficult to say somebody is being honest or not depending on their body language or word choice without knowing them, and even then it's hard. And this is where we get the first error, misclassification. If you just saying, I don't know, means you're lying, it's hard to imagine how many people could be misclassified as guilty or lying and are honestly just in the wrong place and generally don't know the answer. Then comes the second error. So you are now an innocent person under interrogation for something that you didn't do, with the copper in front of you thinking that you're lying and telling you as much. Now they coerce you. They do this by claiming they are the all-knowing investigator, that they've been working the case for months now, they know everything about it and you. They might use a file of blank papers as a prop for thematic effect, and at this point they are constantly telling you that they know you're guilty. They have all the evidence and they just need you to say it or give your reasoning. They put the pressure on you as much as possible and they make it seem like there is no way out outside of confessing. They place you in a dark room, they'll often leave you alone in there, sometimes cold, maybe hungry, and it's designed to break you down mentally. Details like the placement of your chair are even thought about beforehand, and their aim is to break the illusion of innocence will save me, and they are ruthless with it. So of course this is all very disorientating, and it's supposed to be. They've probably said you've done it about 100 times and they will interrupt you with claims that you are guilty, and they know it every time you try to claim your innocence. You might even be there off your own free will, but they will make it feel like you're not. They'll want you to reach a low point mentally so you effectively crumble, and the Reed technique is also designed to give you a way out. In almost every false confession, what we see is what is called a false evidence ploy. This is just the police telling a lie. It might be a general ploy, or it could be specific, like you're caught on camera, or they have your prints at the crime scene. But this can run the risk of you then knowing that the police are lying. But often we will find people will believe them because of the mental state that they're in at the current time. It will often come at a time where you're already overwhelmed, or it could just be the all-knowing police officer repeatedly saying that they know it's you and they just need to hear it from you. They have legally been able to lie in interrogations since 1969, since the Supreme Court decision of Fraser v's Cupp, and they do it very freely. Then comes the way out. They will give a moral or legal excuse as to why you should agree. They say things like, you were just mad, they angered you to do it, it's understandable. Did you start it or did you just react? You was forced to do this. Did you wake up today and want this? You're not a monster. This is supposed to give the false impression that you will be treated with more leniency if you just confess to a less awful version of the same very awful crime. They say things like, once you tell the truth, we'll be done. We're nearly all wrapped up, and once you confess, you can just get on with your life. Of course, all of this is lies. What they need you to do is say something specific. Just saying that you did it won't be enough to get a conviction easily. They need you to say something that only the, for example, killer would know. So how does this happen? Because that can't just be a slip-up, right? This is where the final error comes in, contamination. There is a very good example of this that we're going to look at together soon, but it's not uncommon of the police to fact feed, something mostly frowned upon in the world of interrogation, but this is where the interrogating officer will tell the suspect they are questioning a detail, either on purpose or by accident, or ask suggestive questions that lead to a certain answer, that is then repeated by the suspect and taken for a detail that they shouldn't have known if they were innocent, and can sometimes be the thing that puts them away. Neil Nelson, a police commander in St. Paul, took a false confession of a 13-year-old in regards to a murder. Only after reviewing the video footage did the commander realise he had fed all of the details to the 13-year-old and subsequently forced them to drop the charges against him. It's a good job that that was recorded, so is the story with the footage we are going to look at today. Because in the case of Brendan Dassey, there are many points to talk about. We're going to use his interrogation to highlight some of the errors that we have gone over. It's the case that is featured in the Netflix series Making a Murderer. This case and the interrogation footage have been studied and documented extensively. For anyone that doesn't know, I'll give a brief background of the case and then we'll get into the interrogation. So, part 2, Dassey.
Well, I'm going to guess that the fact you're here means that most of you know the story of Making a Murderer. In 2003, Wisconsin resident Stephen Avery was exonerated of a rape he didn't commit after spending 18 years in prison. 2 years after his release, he went on to be accused of the brutal murder of 26-year-old Teresa Halbach. Eventually, as the state worked hard to build a case against Avery, his nephew, 16-year-old Brendan Dassey, was swept up in the sting. Brendan was brought in for police questioning, initially because he was his uncle's alibi, at least in part. But he eventually gave the police a detailed confession on videotape to helping Stephen rape and murder Teresa Halbach. Brendan was tried to great media fanfare as an adult. He was convicted, received a life sentence. Like his uncle, he's fighting that conviction, and we're honored to represent him in that effort. Now, the Making a Murderer story is fascinating, and it's rightly captured the attention of the nation. But while it's fascinating, and while it's a useful case to study and understand, the story is still raw for Brendan, for his mother, his family, those close to him. Because Brendan is living it. While we all sit here in this beautiful auditorium this evening, he's sitting in an 8-by-10 prison cell, a cage, really, in rural Wisconsin, where he's going to be sitting until he's 59 years old.
The story of Brendan Dassey, who, at age 16, confessed to being a party to the first-degree murder, mutilation of a corpse, and second-degree sexual assault, is certainly an interesting one. He was sentenced to life in prison with the earliest possibility of parole in 2048. His videotaped interrogation and confession, which he did recant at trial, substantially contributed to his and his uncle's conviction. After his conviction, Dassey's case was taken over by the Centre on Wrongful Convictions of Youth, and since then, there has been a constant back and forth of appeals and sadly denials. As it stands, both are still incarcerated for life, and Dassey's confession was real and truthful as determined by the courts. So that confession, why don't we take a closer look? I'm going to let Laura Nyrider take over again so you can hear this from a professional. She also adds lots of interesting insights about Dassey that I think are helpful when trying to look at this case.
So let's take a look. Let's think about that first error we talked about, the misclassification error, right? This behavioral analysis idea. Remember this slide. This is the slide of characteristics that are supposed to be shown by people who are lying. Let's look. It says slouched. Here's a screenshot of Brendan's interrogation. He's slouched. It says hand over mouth or eyes. Sure enough, he's got his hand over his mouth. Rigid and immobile. Well, this is a screenshot, but what you're going to see in the videos is he doesn't move very much. He kind of stays in that one position. Barriered posture. He's got his hand in front of him like this. It's a barrier. And, as for these verbal things, somebody who says, I don't know, must be lying. Let me tell you, if there's one thing that Brendan Dassey said hundreds of times during that interrogation, it's, I don't know. I think what was happening in that interrogation room is the officers were using this notion of behavioral analysis to make judgments about Brendan based on his body language, based on his choice of words, based on the fact that he answered questions, I don't know. And we can see where that got us. Now, there's another part to this misclassification error, I think, in Brendan's case. Okay? This down here is an email that was sent by a man named Pete Bates. He was the defense investigator hired by Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, Stephen Avery's attorneys. And the defense investigator was researching Brendan's background just in case Brendan decided to testify against his uncle. They wanted to be prepared. So this is an email that investigator sent to Dean and Jerry. Let me read it. He says, this kid, Brendan, has had problems since kindergarten, particularly in the social area. It's noted from as early as 3rd grade that he can't look an adult in the eye. He's withdrawn. He doesn't function well with others. He's been in special ed classes since grade school. He has trouble understanding vocabulary both to and from him. He's been continually diagnosed as having a learning disability. He's easily intimidated and withdraws into himself in confrontational situations. This is Brendan's disability. But I think that too, these characteristics too, caused those investigators to make the wrong judgments about Brendan. This failure to look people in the eye, this withdrawing during social situations. This is his disability, and I think it also is the misclassification error. What I'd like to show you now is a couple of clips from Brendan's interrogation. I'm going to start here with clips that show the coercion, the second error that we talked about today. In particular, clips that show that omniscience ploy that Steve talked about. This tactic of pretending that the interrogator knows everything there is to know about what happened. There's nothing you can do to fool me. I know it all already. Let's watch this unfold. And these clips that I'm about to show, just to orient you, are from the interrogation on March 1st, but they begin talking about things that Brendan had previously said 2 days earlier on February 27th.
And we know, like Tom said, we reviewed those tapes. We know there's some things you left out. And we know there's some things that maybe weren't quite correct that you told us, okay? We've been investigating this a long time. We pretty much know everything. That's why we're talking to you again today. Why did he have you come over there? Did he need help with something? Remember, we already know, but we need to hear it from you. Why did he have you come over there? Brenda, were you there when this happened?
No.
Okay. Was she dead there then or not?
Yeah.
How do you know that? I have a feeling I know how you know that.
We already know, Brandon. We already know. Come on, be honest with us. Be honest with us. We already know. It's okay. We're going to help you through this, all right? Oh, come on, be honest. You went back into that room.
Don't let us down, Brendan.
We know you were back there. Let's get it all out today. This will be all over with. Brendan, be honest. You were there when she died. We know that. Don't start lying now. We know you were there. What happened?
Let's just start with the room in which he finds himself. You notice Brendan is sitting on a couch, but he's literally backed into a corner, isn't he? And he's got two police interrogators right in front of him, blocking the exit to the door, which is to his right. And what are they saying to him? We already know, Brendan. They're building a psychological wall. We know what's right. You can't dissuade us. There's nothing you can say to shake our belief that we know exactly what you did. And they walk him through every fact of the case. This is just a sample. You were there, Brendan. We already know. You went back in that room, Brendan. We already know. You were there when she died, Brendan. We already know. Again and again and again. And I think that this dynamic, frankly, was particularly devastating for somebody like Brendan, who's just a kid in school who always gets the answer wrong, but really wants to get it right. So this is part of the presentation of false evidence against Brendan, the officers claiming that they know exactly what happened. Part of that process of confrontation and accusation. And it goes on for some time. But after this process brings Brendan down to that point of hopelessness, my God, they say they already know what I did. They're telling me they have evidence. They're not letting me even assert my own innocence. They just keep accusing me. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? After they bring him down to that point of hopelessness, these officers tell Brendan what's at stake. They remind him what's at stake. And then they offer him that out that Steve talked about. So this theme, these next clips that I want to show you, they start on February 27th, so you'll hear that audio from the high school. And then it continues on March 1st. Let's watch.
We've got people back at the Sheriff's Department, District Attorney's Office, and it's now saying there's no way that Brendan Dassey is out there and they see something. And they're talking about trying to link Brendan Dassey with this event. Not saying that Brendan did it, but saying Brendan had something to do with it or cover up on top of it, which Brendan Dassey could potentially be facing charges for that. We've gotten a lot of information. You know, some people don't care. Some people back there are saying, well, let us target. So no, let us talk about this. You know, the opportunity to come forward with the information that we have. Get it off of his chest. You know, make it look, you can make it look hard if you want.
We want to go back and tell people that, you know, Brendan told us what he did. We want to be able to tell people that Brendan was honest. It's not like Steve. He's honest. He's a good guy. He's gonna go places in this life. But in order for us to do that, you need to be honest with us, and so far you're not being 100% honest.
Mark, I think both of them know that. Yes, they're very straightforward, finally told us. Imagine how it's in the way. We'll understand that.
We'll go back for you. You have to be honest with you.
Because Mark and I looked at the tapes, looked at the notes, and it's real obvious there's some places where some things were left out or maybe changed just a bit to maybe looking at yourself to protect yourself a little. From what I'm seeing, even if I fill those in, I'm thinking you're all right. Okay, you don't have to worry about things. We're there for you, and we know what Stephen did, and we know kind of what happened to you and what he did. We just need to hear the whole story from you. And as soon as we get that, we're comfortable with that. I think you're going to be a lot more comfortable with that. It's going to be a lot easier on you down the road if this goes to trial and stuff like that.
Honesty here, Brendan, is the thing that's going to help you. Okay, no matter what you did, we can work through that. Okay, we can't make any promises, but we'll stand behind you no matter what you did. Okay, because you're being the good guy here. You're the one that's saying, you know what, maybe I made some mistakes, but here's what I did. The other guy involved in this doesn't want to help himself. All he wants to do is blame everybody else. Okay, and by you talking with us, it's helping you. Okay. Because the honest person is the one that's going to get a better deal out of everything. You know how that works. Mm-hmm. You know, honesty is the only thing that'll set you free.
With someone who knows what to look for pointing things out, the errors of the interrogation are far more glaring in this presentation. This case has been riddled with controversies, from Avery's wrong conviction 20 years ago, all the way to the judge ordering Dassey to be released, but then that got overturned, and that was just in the last few years. It's unsure what the future of Dassey will look like, but it does seem like there is a strong case of police coercion resulting in a phony confession. It's really sad to know that this is still an injustice that hasn't been corrected yet, but there is still time, for Dassey at least. Avery I'm not so sure about, and if he is innocent, then his story is just as tragic. My intention with this video was to try and condense the 2-hour presentation and make a shorter video that hits all the same points, but I'll leave the full presentation in the description. In part 2, we will dive into the case a little bit more and the psychology side of things better, as we didn't really get a chance to dive into that here, as my PC will not take much more editing. But this video did what I wanted to do anyway, so I do hope you found this interesting and you would like to come back for part 2. But that will be all for now. New video coming soon. Thanks again. Take care.